Okay, so now that we have pretty much the base of it done, right? We can make the request to the URL and we can display the information in our application. Let's try to make it a bit easier to use. Let's make it more user-friendly. So in my XAML, I have a text box here. So the user can put in a location, and then when they press the search button, this is when we actually want to make the request to the API and search for the specific location they put in this box. So to do that, I'm just gonna grab this text box here, and its name is search. Okay. So we want to go to the XAML, and I want to make it so when this button is pressed, right, when the search button is pressed, we want to basically call the show weather method. So in XAML, we can just go click like this, and new event handler. If you just press enter, it'll put in one for you. Update button click. And then if we go back to the C#, we can see that there's a new method added down here. Update button click. So this will be called every time that button is clicked. So every time that button is clicked, all we want to do is we want to show weather. And then in show weather, why don't we add in a parameter for the location? So we can actually change this Q option up here to whatever the user puts in. So in the show weather parameters here, string location. And then instead of Squamish, instead of hard coding Squamish in, we're gonna put in curly braces and then location. Oh, it doesn't like that actually because there's already a variable named location. So I'm gonna call it search location because that's truly what it is. It's a better name for it. Search location. Okay, there we go. And we don't need to call it up here in the main method because we only want to call it when the user presses the search button. And what do we want to pass into here? We want to pass in search. So this is the text box where the user types in the location they want to search for, and then just .text to get the value, the string that's inside of there. Okay, so now this will show weather with the string that's inside of the text box when the user presses the search button. And to make it a bit smoother, when we first load up the application, I'm gonna hide all of this. So only the search bar is shown because there'll be no information here, right? It'll just be the placeholders. So we want to only show it once there's actually data in there. So when we first load up the application, we want the weather information to be hidden. And I've already made a kind of a stack panel around it. Here, this stack panel, and it's called weather container. So this contains all of the elements that display the weather. So I can go weather container and then dot visibility is equal to visibility dot collapsed, and this will basically just hide it. And then when we show weather, after we put in all of that, we can show it again by going weather container dot visibility is equal to visibility dot visible. Okay, so let's try this. Okay, so great, the data is hidden, and let's search for something. Let's search for Squamish, press the search button, and look at that, all the information shows up as it's loaded. Now you might see this error text up here, and it's the text block that shows the errors when the request runs into an error. So right now we're kind of showing the data no matter what happens to the request, but truly we should be checking if the request was successful or not, because this will only be containing this data if it's successful. So let's put this inside of an if statement. So if response.status code, so we want to grab this, right, the response of the API request, if the status code is equal to HTTP status code. So this is system.net. So we can import that, or let's just get rid of it, and then Alt Enter. We can do using system.net like that, and then dot OK. So dot OK is basically if the status code is 200, like that. So if the response is successful, and then we can grab all of this and put it in there. Okay. Now, what if the response is not successful? So I'm going to go back to Chrome and show you an example of if the request is not successful. For example, if we search for a location that doesn't exist, I'm just going to press some keys on my keyboard. So now we're searching for a location that does not exist. And we can see we get an error. Status code is 400, bad request. You can see in the response, it gives us information about what went wrong, right? No matching location found. So this is the text I want to show in that error text block. And this means that we need to make a new class when we deserialize the information. So let's scroll down here. Down here, I'm make a new class, and I'm going to call it weather error, like this. It's going to be public string, and I think it's called message. Yeah, it's called message. Just like that. Okay. And that is contained within the very top object. So we need to make it in here. So this is called error, right? Yeah, error. Okay. So now if this error isn't there, like if this is successful, you can see in the response, there's no error, right? It's not there. So if it's not there, when we deserialize it, it'll just skip over it. It'll just ignore it because it doesn't exist in the response. And that goes the same for when there is an error, right? There's no current or location. So it'll just skip over it because it doesn't exist in the response. But when there is an error, that means that the status code will be 400. We saw that earlier. So we can check if it's 200, if it's successful, and then else, if the response.status code is equal to HTTP status code dot bad request. Here you can see bad request is 400. Bad request. Put some brackets in there. Okay, so if there's a bad request, that means that this weather object will have an error message. So now we want to grab this error text block, which is name is error, and replace the text with the error message. So error dot text is equal to weather dot error dot message, right? Because we grabbed weather, which is the weather response, and then we go to error, which is weather error, and then message, which is down here in weather error, just a string. So let's see if that works. Let's run this. And let's search for some place that does not exist. Let's search for that. And you can see the error text changes to no matching location found. So that worked great. But let's only show this error message when there actually is an error, because you could see earlier that the error text was showing even when there was no error. So when we go back to the top, when we show this weather container, or when we hide it at the very start, let's hide the error as well, just because there's no error at the very start of the application. So error.visibility is equal to visibility.collapsed. So when we show weather, if the status code is 200, or when the response is successful, we want to hide the error as well. Error.visibility is equal visibility.collapsed. But when there is an error, we want to hide the weather, and only show the error. So it's basically the opposite of this. I'm going to copy that. So the weather container visibility is going to be collapsed, and the error visibility is going to be visible. Okay. So let's restart the application. Okay, and you can see nothing shows up except the search bar and the search button. And let's search for Squamish. Search. Okay, beautiful. Everything shows up nicely. The icon updates and the error message is not there. Now let's search for someplace that does not exist. Let's search for that. Search. And you can see the weather data hides itself, and now the error message is shown. All that just with the status code of the request, by knowing when it's successful and or not successful. Okay, so right now you can see if I search for something, the data is really small, and I meant it to be small like that, but see how the window is huge? I want to make this window just be the size of my data, or my layout of my XAML. And you can do that in the main method when you first initialize your application. There's a few parameters you can pass to change the size of your window. So first you can go application view. You might need to import this using Windows app, import that. Application view, and then dot get for current view. So this just gets basically the view of the current application. That's a method, and then dot set preferred minimum size. So you can see, I'm gonna comment that out for a second while I run this to show you something. You can see when I try to resize this, there's a minimum size, right? Like I can't go any smaller than this. But I want to go smaller than that, right? Because the width of my data is smaller than this width, but I can't make it any smaller. So I'm going to change this preferred minimum size. And I've already found some good values that work for me. So a new size. And then for me, what works well is 300 by 400. But that's just minimum, so you can always make it bigger than this. This just kind of sets the limit of how small you can go. But then to set the actual size of your application, you can go application view dot preferred launch view size. So this is the size of your application when you first launch it. And you can set that equal to a new size, and I'm just gonna make it 400 by 400. That's just the value that worked well for me. If your layout is different, it'll definitely look different, or the values will be different for you. And now we want to actually use this preferred size. So application view dot preferred launch windowing mode. And this is going to be application view viewing mode dot preferred view launch size. So basically it says that we set the preferred size, and here we actually say to use the preferred size. So now if I restart the application, you can see that right away it launches nicely into a smaller size, and we can resize it smaller than what we could before. And we search, and we can see that the width is nice with this data, and it's nice like this. Okay, so that completes this tutorial on how to use a weather API to make a universal Windows application. I hope you learned something new and had fun making this, and I encourage you to explore more of this API, because look at the documentation. There's so much more you can do, right? You can see we're just using this current weather, but you could get forecast, you could get the history of weather, astronomy, IP lookup. There's a bunch of different stuff you can do with this API. So I encourage you to look into it. Thanks for watching.